According to a memo sent to California police chiefs, Governor Gavin Newsom was set to order all beaches and state parks in the state closed starting on May 1st. But then today, in the face of backlash over that memo, Newsom backpedaled and says he'll shut down all beaches in Orange County only, not statewide. Because Newsom called last weekend's crowds at those beaches, quote, what not to do. And yes, there were people at the beaches last weekend because the beaches were open and it was 85 degrees outside. But read this line from The Hollywood Reporter, and I quote, lifeguards said most people practiced social distancing, end quote. Again, people are distancing, but Newsom closes those beaches anyway. Newsom claims he's letting the science dictate his political policy decisions, but he's not. Number one, it's hot outside in California, which Department of Homeland Security studies show kills the virus. Heat, humidity, and sunlight kill the virus. Number two, studies from Germany and Taiwan and Hong Kong all show COVID-19 is rarely, if ever, transmitted outdoors in large areas, especially when people are only coming in casual contact with each other. German virologist Professor Hendrik Streeck found the risk of transmission while shopping is rare. Streeck found that transmission occurs the vast majority of the time intrafamilial, which means in situations among family members in close contact. And Streeck is not the only one. Scientists from Hong Kong studied 318 COVID-19 infection clusters of 3 or more infections in China outside the Hubei province, and they found not one cluster of coronavirus infections occurred outside. The researchers concluded, and I quote, all identified outbreaks of 3 or more cases occurred in an indoor environment, which confirms that sharing indoor space is a major COVID infection risk, end quote. The Taiwan CDC also tracked 1,000 contacts of 32 people infected with COVID-19 and found 0 cases of transmission from those 32 people to anybody outside the households or families of those infected. Furthermore, young, healthy people are at extremely low risk of dying from COVID-19. Here are the numbers in New York, for example. Heather McDonald writes, and I quote, for those 17 and younger, the coronavirus death rate is 0, end quote. Dr. Scott Atlas from Stanford writes, the fatality rate in New York for people between the ages of 18 and 45 is 0.01%, or 11 per 100,000. Dr. Atlas says, and I quote, the overwhelming majority of people do not have any significant risk of dying from COVID-19. The recent Stanford University antibody study now estimates that the fatality rate, if infected, is likely 0.1 to 0.2%. In New York, he says, in New York City, an epicenter of the pandemic with more than 1/3 of all U.S. deaths, the rate of death for people 18 to 45 years old is 0.01%. He says, of all fatal cases in New York State, 2/3 were in patients over 70 years of age. More than 95% were over 50 years of age, and about 90% of all fatal cases had an underlying illness. Of 6,570 confirmed COVID-19 deaths fully investigated for underlying conditions to date, 6,520, or 99.2%, had an underlying illness. He says if you do not already have an underlying chronic condition, your chances of dying are small, regardless of age. And young adults and children in normal health have almost no risk of any serious illness from COVID-19, end quote. Science also says we need sunlight and exercise to be healthy. Anna Miller writes at Business Insider, and I quote, one study of over 1,000 adults found that those who walked at least 20 minutes a day, 5 days a week, reported 43% fewer sick days than their less active counterparts, end quote. And Harvard Health found that even when active people get sick, it wasn't as severe and didn't last as long. And it's not just exercise, we need the outdoors. Miller quotes Dr. Jedediah Ballard, an ER physician, who says, and I quote, vitamin D plays a role in immune function, and sunlight is needed for our bodies to convert it to its active form, end quote. Miller writes, group nature walks have been found with lower depression, less stress, and better mental health and well-being. Other research has shown that forest bathing trips, or long stretches of time in the woods, can boost the number of white blood cells that fight viruses and tumors, end quote. In fact, Miller writes that a professor of cardiovascular medicine says exercise should be recommended alongside social distancing to fight COVID-19 because his research suggests it may protect against acute respiratory distress syndrome, which is a top cause of death among COVID-19 patients. In other words, Governor Newsom, you have a choice. Either you deny science and shut down beaches, or you follow the science and open the beaches.